In a quiet town that rarely made the news, life flowed in a rhythm so predictable that people rarely locked their doors. Streets were lined with modest houses, grocery stores greeted the same customers every day, and whispers of gossip never strayed far from the truth. Yet, within this calm setting lived a young woman whose presence went almost unnoticed. Melissa Green was only 19 years old, a girl who seemed to blend into the background wherever she went. She wasn't remembered for her smile, her clothes, or her voice. She was the kind of person who walked down the street and passed by without leaving an impression. Teachers once described her as distant, and classmates recalled she never joined conversations. By the time she was out of school, Melissa's name was nearly forgotten, even by those who had once known her. Her home mirrored her personality. A dim apartment tucked away in a crumbling building, its walls were stained with age, its windows clouded with dust. Curtains were drawn most of the time, and very few people ever saw her inside. The neighbors sometimes heard faint music, the shuffle of footsteps, or the creak of her old door, but never laughter, never the sound of company. Melissa moved through life in isolation, and the few people who spoke of her described her as polite but detached. She had no friends who visited, no family who checked in regularly, and no sign of anyone close to her heart. When her pregnancy began, it was not accompanied by joy or the celebrations often shared by expectant mothers. Instead, it was concealed under oversized clothes and silence. Melissa ignored the changes in her body as if pretending hard enough might make them disappear. She never stepped into a doctor's office for a checkup, never bought baby supplies from a local store, and never revealed her secret to neighbors. Her swollen belly went unseen by most, hidden carefully beneath dark sweaters and baggy jackets. The months slipped by, and though life grew inside her, she refused to acknowledge it. What no one could have imagined was the storm that was quietly brewing within her. Melissa's journals, uncovered later, would tell the story she never spoke aloud. In them, she wrote of bitterness that consumed her, resentment toward the life she had been dealt, and a strange detachment from the world around her. Page after page revealed that she viewed her unborn child not as a blessing, but as an anchor tying her down to the kind of existence she hated. She scribbled words like trapped, prison, and unwanted, giving a glimpse into the thoughts that haunted her during sleepless nights. Outwardly, nothing changed. She still walked to the store on occasion, buying small amounts of food with cash, her eyes always fixed on the ground. She answered no questions, spoke to no one longer than a few seconds, and quickly returned to the shadows of her apartment. Inside, however, she was waiting, not for a new beginning but for an ending only she could see coming. The baby entered the world on a cold and silent night, hidden from everyone, unseen by doctors or nurses, unheard by family or neighbors. Melissa gave birth alone in her dim apartment, the thin walls pressing in on her as she crouched on the worn carpet. No bright lights or helping hands greeted the infant. There was only the faint flicker of a lamp, the smell of mildew in the air, and Melissa's own shallow breaths. She did not cry out in pain, she did not call for help, and when the child's cries finally filled the room, there was no joy in her face. She reached for a dull pair of scissors from her kitchen drawer to cut the cord and wrap the newborn in a threadbare blanket pulled from a pile of laundry. The child's small body trembled in the cold, his cries sharp and desperate, but Melissa only stared at him with tired, vacant eyes. For hours she sat motionless, holding the baby without comfort, without warmth in her expression. She had prepared nothing for him. No crib, no bottles, no tiny clothes. In her mind, she had not been waiting for a child at all. Her journals later revealed she thought of him as a mistake, a weight she had been forced to carry, a presence she wished she could erase. Still, instinct kept her moving in those first days. She fed him from an old plastic bottle she found in a drawer, filled with watered-down milk she bought from the corner store. The baby cried constantly, the sound echoing through the thin apartment walls, but each time the cries grew loud, Melissa grew colder. Neighbors would later recall faint noises in the night, but they thought it was a television or a radio turned too low. Nobody imagined a newborn struggling for life just a few steps away. The days blurred together. Melissa rarely slept. She paced the room, holding the baby without tenderness, her face pale under the dim light. At times she would set him down on a towel spread across the floor, watching him squirm and cry until exhaustion silenced him. Each cry seemed to harden her further, deepening the wall between them. The child reached for warmth that never came, while Melissa sank further into her own bitterness. By the third day, her decision was already forming, though no one around her knew a thing. She avoided looking at her baby for long, as if the sight of him only fueled her anger. Instead of planning for his future, she scribbled more chilling lines into her journal. Words that spoke of release, of fire, of cleansing. She had no baby shower, no visits from neighbors bearing gifts, no congratulations from family. She had only silence, resentment, and a child she refused to accept. As the infant drifted between restless cries and fragile sleep, Melissa's mind moved steadily toward a conclusion. To others, it would have been unthinkable, unimaginable. To her, it was already becoming inevitable. On the fourth night, Melissa's decision hardened into action. The air outside was cold and sharp, the kind of night when even the streets seemed deserted. She waited until the town had fallen quiet, the hum of traffic gone, the neighbors asleep, the world too still to notice. In her small apartment, she wrapped the baby in a thin, worn sheet, folding the fabric tightly around his small body. His faint cries pierced the silence, but Melissa did not flinch. She tucked him against her chest, pulled on a heavy coat, and stepped into the night as if carrying nothing more than a burden she was ready to discard. She walked with steady steps, avoiding the main roads, moving through alleys and side paths where no one would see her. The newborn stirred restlessly, but Melissa's face remained blank, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. In one hand, she carried a small plastic can of gasoline, stolen days earlier from a neighbor's shed. She had hidden it carefully in her apartment, waiting for this exact moment. Now, with the child pressed against her and the can swaying at her side, she moved toward the outskirts of town, her destination already chosen. Behind an abandoned warehouse stood a field that no one cared about. The grass was long and brittle, scattered with rusted cans, broken glass, and remnants of forgotten lives. Melissa stepped into the field, her shoes crunching softly on the frozen ground. The moon hung low, casting a pale glow across the scene, but there was no one to witness her arrival. She stopped near the center, kneeling as she placed the baby on the ground. He whimpered at the sudden chill, his tiny hands flailing as the night air wrapped around him. For a brief moment, there was silence, a pause that seemed to stretch endlessly. Melissa unscrewed the cap of the can and poured the gasoline over the sheet. The liquid soaked through quickly, releasing its sharp, chemical scent into the night air. The baby squirmed, sensing something was wrong, but his cries were too small to pierce the emptiness of the field. Melissa struck a match with calm precision, the flame flickering bright against the darkness. Without hesitation, she let it fall. In an instant, the fire ignited, flames racing across the fabric, consuming everything in their path. The newborn's cries turned into sharp, piercing screams that echoed across the deserted space. The flames burned high, orange and violent, casting Melissa's shadow long against the warehouse wall. She did not move, did not waver, only stood watching as the fire grew, then faltered, then reduced itself to smoldering embers. The cries fell silent, replaced by the crackle of burning cloth and the hiss of cooling ash. When it was over, Melissa turned and walked away. She left behind only smoke rising into the night sky, carrying with it the last trace of what she had done. Her footsteps faded into the distance, the quiet town still unaware that one of its darkest secrets had just been written in fire. The next morning, the town stirred awake in its usual rhythm, unaware that something unspeakable lay waiting to be discovered. Workers from a construction crew arrived at the abandoned warehouse to clear debris and prepare the site for renovation. As they stepped into the overgrown field, one of them noticed a strange patch of blackened earth. At first, it looked like the remnants of a bonfire, charred grass and ash scattered loosely by the wind. But as they drew closer, the shape of the remains became unmistakable. What they saw stopped them cold, tiny bones and burned fragments wrapped in melted cloth, a sight so disturbing that several men turned away in shock. Within minutes, the police were called, and the field that had once been forgotten was transformed into the scene of a crime that would haunt the town forever. Detectives and forensic teams arrived swiftly, marking off the ground with yellow tape and photographing every angle. The air was heavy with the smell of burned fabric and gasoline, a stench that clung stubbornly even as the cold wind moved across the open space. Officers spoke in low, tense voices, many of them shaken by what they were forced to examine. Some had seen murders before, but the sight of a newborn's remains was unlike anything they could easily comprehend. The horror of it seemed to settle over them like a shadow, pressing down on their shoulders as they carried out their duties. News of the discovery spread quickly through the community. Whispers turned to gasps, and soon the entire town was buzzing with fear and disbelief. People gathered outside the taped-off field, covering their mouths, their eyes wide with sorrow and horror. Some wept openly, unable to process that such cruelty had unfolded in the very place they called home. Others speculated in hushed tones, wondering who among them could be capable of such violence. Parents clutched their children closer, suddenly aware that even the safest-seeming places could conceal monsters. Investigators worked tirelessly, but the challenge before them was immense. The remains were so badly burned that identifying the victim seemed almost impossible. Forensic experts collected fragments with meticulous care, piecing together what little evidence the flames had spared. The melted cloth was bagged, the soil tested for chemical traces, and every step of the process was documented in silence. The fire had destroyed much, but not everything. Small details, tiny bones, traces of fabric, the lingering odor of gasoline, spoke louder than words. The police chief addressed the press that evening, his voice solemn as he confirmed the unimaginable truth: the remains belonged to a newborn. The town fell into collective shock. Questions erupted from every corner. Who was the child's mother, why had this happened, and how had no one noticed? The crime was described as one of the most disturbing acts the community had ever witnessed. Rumors filled the gaps in knowledge, spreading through neighborhoods like wildfire. Some claimed a stranger must have done it, a drifter passing through. Others whispered that the killer had to be someone from the town itself, someone they might pass on the street every day. The idea that such evil could exist so close to home rattled everyone. As days passed, fear and suspicion grew. People eyed their neighbors differently, wondering if the face of the murderer might be someone they thought they knew. Meanwhile, behind the closed door of her dim apartment, Melissa Green sat quietly, carrying on her life as if nothing had happened, while detectives searched tirelessly for the truth that would soon lead directly to her. The investigation pressed forward with urgency, every officer aware that the community was demanding answers. Detectives began their work the traditional way, knocking on doors, speaking to neighbors, and asking if anyone had noticed something unusual in recent weeks. Most residents shook their heads, insisting their small town had always been quiet. But in the haze of gossip, one detail surfaced that investigators could not ignore. A neighbor mentioned a young woman named Melissa Green who had once been visibly pregnant but was no longer seen with a child. It was said casually, but for detectives desperate for leads, it was a thread worth pulling. They visited Melissa's apartment, a crumbling building that looked as neglected as the woman who lived inside it. When she opened the door, her expression was flat, her eyes dull and unbothered by the presence of uniformed officers. She allowed them in without resistance, but inside the apartment, the air felt heavy. The room was cluttered, the curtains drawn tightly against the daylight, and a faint odor lingered in the corners. At first glance, there was nothing incriminating, but the officers noticed small details: a baby bottle discarded in the trash, faint stains on the worn carpet, and a pile of laundry that seemed hastily stuffed into bags. They requested a warrant, certain they had stumbled onto something far darker than Melissa was willing to admit. With legal access, a full search unfolded. Blood-stained sheets were discovered beneath her bed, the marks faint but undeniable. In the garbage, investigators found remnants of burned fabric that matched the melted material recovered from the field. And hidden inside a drawer were journals that chilled even the most hardened detectives. Page after page was filled with bitter, angry words about her pregnancy, her child, and her overwhelming hatred for the life forced upon her. She had written about fire, about erasure, about cleansing herself of what she described as a burden she never wanted. Each entry painted a picture of intent, leaving little doubt that what had happened in the field was not an accident but a deliberate act. Melissa was taken into custody, her hands cuffed as officers led her from the building. Crowds had already gathered outside, drawn by whispers of her connection to the crime. Some stood in stunned silence, others shouted in disbelief or anger, but Melissa herself remained expressionless, her face a mask that revealed nothing. She did not protest, did not cry, and offered no words of defense. In court, the evidence was overwhelming. Forensic experts confirmed that the remains matched her newborn. The gasoline residue on the soil linked directly to the container found in her apartment. Her journals were read aloud, their disturbing entries leaving jurors visibly shaken. The case was swift, the verdict decisive. Melissa Green was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The town never recovered fully from the shock. For years, The story of the young mother who set her newborn on fire was whispered in hushed tones, retold with disbelief and sorrow. It became a reminder that even in the quietest of places, darkness can live unseen, hiding behind closed doors until it finally steps into the light. Thanks for watching this episode of Crime Uncovered. If you found the story gripping, don't forget to like the video, share it with friends who love true crime, and hit the subscribe button with the bell icon so you never miss our next disturbing case. Every click helps us uncover more untold stories.